close-up. This is, I think this is very hard to see if you're not sitting right in front, but this is a close-up showing all of the cracks that are actually in the pot. And I think that's kind of neat for the kids to recognize that these things were found by archaeologists in a million different pieces and put back together, and that's a job that somebody has, and we were able to put this back together and learn a piece of history through that. Okay, so this is now moving into another kind of pottery, a little bit more advanced, called black figure pottery. And you can just begin by asking the kids, why do you think this was called black figure pottery? Let them recognize that this was actually created in a very different artistic style.
Maybe they can tell you how it's different from the other ones with the background and highlighted natural clay, you know.
Exactly. And then
this one, I mean, the more I was saying, like, this is showing them preparing for a trade, using the scale, you know, taking note of, you know, the weight, and then being prepared to trade with other civilizations.
So it's so interesting. The kids just think money always existed. So I think just to recognize that this was an early way of trade, and to kind of think about how manufacturing developed over time, etc. This is also the time when, and again, you have to be very close to see this, signatures were first seen on the pottery. And this top part are actually little letters, and maybe we should blow this up so the kids can actually see the signed, the signatures. And the potter and the painter would often sign the pot. And so this started showing us a little bit about the importance of the individual on the pot, as opposed to the earlier, more kind of religious and mythological symbols. We start to get into scenes of daily life, like you see here, and in this next piece, which is a hydria with fountain scene. So this is very interesting. I think if the kids can look closely and sort of describe what's going on, hopefully they'll somehow figure out that this is a public water fountain, and there are women fetching water in the actual hydria. So this is where you can get into a little discussion about the shape of the vase versus the representation of what's on it, and what's more important. Here we see the scene describing how this piece was actually used.
Right, and also the role of women in the society and what they were expected to do, and this was one of their jobs, is to collect the water.
Exactly, and here, by the way, if somebody brings up architecture, there's a nice little example of a column, and you can talk about it.
One other, I think this pot is so interesting. When you go to the Met and you see it, it just will send you. One of the things that, it's self-referential, like we were saying. It's a hydria showing you how to use itself. There's the architecture, there's the public fountain. And just think about what that means. How organized does a culture have to be to provide water to the city so that its citizens have clean water? And not only that, it's not just some little spring in the ground. There's this beautiful architectural portico, there's columns, the lion's fountain. It's so fascinating. What you can't really see on this, and you'll see it when you go, and you will just be so thrilled, is that around the top is actually a scene of warriors. So the women are in this peaceful domestic urban scene, and the men are hovering over them, protecting them by their warfaring activities. So this one, I just think is spectacular.
And the other thing that you can't see visually on here is this is the piece with the third handle. So there are two handles for carrying the water, and a third handle for pouring it. Just the ingenuity, I think it speaks for itself, to answer again your question.
When you're showing these, how close to the actual size are the photographs versus the actual, for us to kind of demonstrate to the kids how massive they are?
I just wanted to say something. I'm kind of interrupting the flow here, but the second piece here, I made a matrix. And the matrix includes besides the actual copy of what's on the back of the images, this matrix is sort of a more historical view of each of the items. So what it has here, for instance, let's see, which one is that? That's the hydria. So,
Here's the hydria.
yeah, so
5B,
5B, right, thank you. So what I've tried to do here is tell you in this column where it's from, what the date is, how high it is, what it was used for, and then a description, and then a little bit more information. So if you wanted to take the time to really familiarize yourself even more than what's just printed on the back, I think this might also be a useful tool for
I think
you.
we're going to do one thing to even make that easier, because that is very interesting, is with the bit, we're going to put very big, poster number 5B, I think I'll put right next to it, 48 inches, or whatever it is, because I do think it's amazing to see. You can't really see this, but this is Amy in front of the pot. It's it's probably this big or so. So we'll just give you the number, 3 feet and 27 inches or whatever.
That's right. The octopus one is about this big, but then they have other ones that are, they're in big cases and they're so huge. And then they have little tiny ones, and then they have this size ones, and they're all, the sizes vary based upon what their functions. The ones for the mixing of the water and the wine at the symposium had a certain size, and they're all kind of, it's just a fascinating display. But
That's a good point. We will add that.
I think that's
Yeah.
I think the kids would like that too, to think about how big they are. Okay, here comes a fun one. This is the Terracotta Pan-Athenaic Prize Amphora. So you can begin by just asking them what they see going on to describe what's happening in the image. And yes, they are definitely going to point out that the 5 men sprinting are nude. Oh my gosh. They used to compete nude. That's just a fact. They'll love it. So what does this tell us about ancient Greeks? And we can begin to get into health and physical fitness. And the fact that this really was a prize from a sporting event called the Pan-Athenaic Festival or Games that came 200 years after the Olympics were started. So the Olympics began in about 776, I believe, BC, and this was from 530. 566 was actually when the games began. And what was interesting about those games is they included sporting events, but they also included other events, competitions in music and poetry. Is there something else?
But if you have a 4th and 5th grader, they have NISMA. I don't know. I'm new to it too, but like the kids are having orchestra and band competitions, and they were doing the same things along with the athletic competitions 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, and we're still doing. Like I'm saying to myself, why is my kid doing this musical competition? But it's funny. It was what was done, and we're still doing it.
Right, and these games were actually held every 4 years. So you could sort of tell the kids a little bit about the games and say, does this remind you of anything? And then, you can ask them, well, what kind of prizes do Olympic winners receive? And they'll tell you medals, etc. And here you can say, well, not only was the jar the prize, but they'll be very shocked to learn that inside the jar was 42 quarts of Athenian olive oil. The very, very exciting prize. So, and just keep reminding them, you can go see this at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, make your families take you, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we're still talking about black figure pottery, and I think right away you can talk about the difference in shape of this pot and the vessels that we've already seen, and how this may affect the function. So hopefully they'll discover that it's more shallow than some of the other stored mixing vessels, suggesting that it was a drinking cup. And indeed, it was a special kind of drinking cup called a kylix that was used at what Amy referred to before, the symposia, which are the banquets where wealthy men would come and discuss politics and philosophy, and citizens were actually